easier to understand hear properly what's going on. This is a seminar. So Barbara, are we recording? We are recording. Okay, so again, welcome to the seminar. It's another one in Inclusion Europe series of webinars about employment, part of a project we've been involved in with our partners Plena Inclusion in Spain, Antwerp Management School in Belgium, and FPIT in Estonia. And we've been looking at how people with intellectual disabilities are being supported to join open labor market, how looking at various companies and businesses and environments in which they are employed at and how that works in different sort of contexts. We've produced during that project research on what employment for people with intellectual disabilities looks like across Europe. We've produced a number of videos on job coaching or flexible accommodations and other relevant stuff. So you can check all that out after we are finished, of course, here today. And we've had seminars about different approaches to supporting people with intellectual disabilities in getting employment in different countries. We've discussed also how employment can and should be supported via the new upcoming European Disability Strategy. And you can revisit all these conversations on Inclusion Europe website. They are available. And today, what we would like to do is to look at how employment with people with disabilities, and particularly people with intellectual disabilities, can be facilitated and supported in European Union institutions. So we have a great lineup of speakers to contribute to this conversation, representing some of the European Union institutions, International Labour Organization, and our member in Spain, Plena Inclusion. And we are so far missing one of the speakers who was to speak first. So we'll move through the agenda, but I will now stop talking and I will let you get through the first presentation and listen to what Rebecca Wieman from the Council of European Union has to tell us about how the Council supports employment of people with disabilities in this European institution. If you have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat box. And sorry, one last thing I forgot to mention is you can turn on live captioning if you need that. You will find that option on the more options, the three dot symbol, and there is live captioning you can turn on. And with that, I hand over to Rebecca and wish you all a very informative and engaging webinar. Please put your questions and comments throughout in the chat box and we will get back to them. Rebecca.
Thank you, Milan, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm really honored and very glad that you invited me for this talk, and thanks a lot to Barbara for all the very smooth preparation in advance of this session. I have to start with two disclaimers. The first one is the usual one that you will expect from people working for the EU institutions. What I'm saying here is not the official political opinion of the Council as a political institution. So that's the first legal disclaimer. The other disclaimer is a more personal one. When I saw the list of other invited speakers and when I see what you all do, I feel quite humbled. And I was thinking, why is it me who is speaking? So I think many of you have a lot more expertise than I have. And so I just want to let you know from the very beginning that I'm not only here to speak about what we are doing, but also really to listen and to learn from you and to have this exchange. So with that, that was my second disclaimer in the very beginning. I have a PowerPoint presentation to share so that you also have a little bit of visual support. I hope this works now. Is it coming up?
Yes, it's coming up. So yeah, we can see the presentation.
But this one says, let me see, because it says
for positive action program for trainees with disabilities.
The main topic that I was asked to speak about is a positive action program for trainees with a disability that we have launched at the council earlier this year. But I thought it's useful for you to get a little bit more of the story behind. How did the council get to starting this positive action program, and what's the context? So I will first focus on the general context, the story, and then speak about the specificities of the positive action program. So the Council of the EU, as many of you are aware, it's one of the legislative bodies of the EU. It's where our laws for Europe are made. So you see here one of the typical council buildings, the ministers getting together. Nowadays, it's a little bit more complicated with COVID, but this picture was taken before the COVID pandemic. So member states, representatives discussing proposal of legislation after proposal of legislation, either at minister level, but then many preparatory bodies. So we have many delegates, experts from the member states coming into our buildings and working in the council buildings every day, unless it's COVID pandemic, when a lot of this takes place online. Now, of course, all of this needs to be handled, prepared, and this is done by the General Secretariat of the Council. So people who permanently work in Brussels to give political advice to the Council and the preparatory bodies, to give legal advice, to do security, IT, HR issues, catering for the meetings. You know, you can imagine it. When there are thousands of meetings taking place each year, you need staff, also linguistic staff to do the translations and so on. So we have approximately 3,000 staff members who work as officials, as council staff. And then there are also some tasks which are outsourced, as you have in many of the EU institutions. So part of IT will be outsourced, part of security will be outsourced, catering, cleaning. These are typical issues that are outsourced. So in addition to the 3,000 people working as GSC staff, we have many others who come in and work with us on a basis of contractuals. Now, on the way of becoming an organization which strives to be inclusive for people with a disability, I think there were 3 eye-openers. And the first one will not surprise you. It's the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, to which the EU has acceded. So this means obviously that the convention does not only need to be implemented in EU policies, but also in the EU institutions as public administration. And many of you probably know that when the first concluding observations under the convention came out from the relevant UN committee, it was not so great, right? On how the EU institutions were doing. So in particular, we got recommendation 89 clearly saying the committee recommends that the European Union increase employment of persons with disabilities in all European Union institutions. So those were very clear words, and I can tell you that they were taken quite seriously in the EU institutions and for sure at the Council. So that was one eye-opener. Another one was our stakeholders and clients, you know, the ministers, the delegates, experts coming into our buildings, unless it's COVID situation and it's a little bit more complicated, but usually. So you see here on the picture, former Minister of Finance, Wolfgang Schäuble, you know, who played a key role in many of the ECOFIN negotiations. And yes, he is a wheelchair user. So of course, you know, the meetings rooms need to be accessible. You know? So these, and he is obviously not the only one, and just a very prominent person. And so the needs not only of our staff, but of our stakeholders and clients, that was, I think, the second eye opener. And then the third is in general in increasing awareness of the benefits of diversity. And this does not only concern disability, but also concerns disability. So our organization sees the more and more the benefits of diversity. We can just not close our eyes to studies which show over and over again that the more diverse an organization it is, the better the outcome, the more innovative the work which is done, the higher the job satisfaction and the better it is for mental health of staff. So we really, as the General Secretariat of the Council, we really want to embrace these findings, and we have been working not only on disability, but also when it comes to other areas, to increasing diversity and inclusion within our organization, not only for the sake of people who benefit, but for the sake of the entire organization, because since we are an organization working on the front line of political work and under pressure of digitalization, COVID-19, and you name it, we just have to embrace these findings to do well. So these were the three eye openers that we had. And then work started, and it's obviously not a chronological pattern, right? It's I've put it slide after slide, but of course this is a little bit, it's an ongoing process. But the first what was done is improving the accessibility of the buildings. You see here the workers adding the pododactyl signage in the atrium of the Justus Lipsius building, which is the biggest of the three council buildings, which you saw in the beginning. So the council buildings are three main buildings. One is very recent, the Europa building, where the summits take place, you know, the meetings of the heads of state, the European Council. But then there are also two other buildings which are older. Hence, the legal requirements in place at the time were not as high as regards accessibility. But a conscious decision was taken to go beyond the legal requirements and to ensure that they are better accessible than what would be the legal requirements in place. So I would say, in terms of accessibility of the buildings, it's not perfect, but we have greatly improved over the last years, and I think we're doing fairly well. There's also more and more work in terms of digital accessibility. The External Council website undergoes, for example, regular screening, but also when it comes to internal IT tools, there's really a lot of work ongoing to improve that aspect of accessibility. As regards the accessibility of the buildings, there is also an, which I think interesting project to give a sort of human touch to this accessibility. The General Secretariat employs floor messengers, so these are people who used to deliver all the paper mail. Now you can imagine that during the last years, the amount of paper mail has greatly decreased, right? Because more and more is done electronically. Yet, so these people had less work, had free capacity. And so then we had the idea to train them to become assistants for persons with reduced mobility. And many of them really did this with a lot of enthusiasm, because also it made their work, more human, gave them new tasks, interesting aspects of their job. And so quite a few of them are now trained to be assistants for persons with reduced mobility. These people might be delegates coming to the meetings, might be visitors of our visitor center, but might also be staff or people working in the building regularly. And there's a number that can be called, and then somebody can help that person navigate through the building, so that the person can fully concentrate on the meeting that he or she is attending. Then we also worked quite a bit on to making our organization more accessible when it comes to rules and guidance. So, for example, a guide was established with all the EU institutions on accessible Brussels. The most important of these internal rules and guidance is, I think, the rules on reasonable accommodation arrangements. We had a little bit of a patchy approach in the past, and since beginning of 2019, we have a very clear policy on how to provide reasonable accommodation, making sure that all sides are heard and that we really have a consistent approach to this within our organization. I see with this slide that I'm not sharing the up-to-date version of this presentation because the heading is missing. So since I know that there are further changes further down, I stop presenting this one and I'll just share the newer version, and apologies for this. So right back with the newest version. Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so, and this should be the new slide. Do you see that one? Yes, and I put it maybe in presentation mode.
Yeah, we see the visitor center slide and it's on
Yes.
the presentation mode. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And apologies for that. There were too many tabs open on my computer. The council also has a visitor center, a little bit like the parliamentarium, but much smaller, I have to admit. And so this is for the general public to learn about the work of the council. And for the visitor center, we have had an accessibility audit, and quite a bit of work has been gone into making not only the site accessible, but also the information that is provided. Something that I find really important for our organization is the existence of two networks. One network of staff with a disability, and the other is a network of carers of people with disability. Many of them parents of children with a disability, but can also be other carers. These networks are not only an important space for colleagues to gather and exchange views and ideas and support, but for us as administration, they're also extremely useful for consultation. So I have often had the experience that when I consult these networks, I see things that I would have missed otherwise. So they're really very valuable comments which come out of the consultations, and we really take great care to consult them. So for us, that is not only a legal obligation that we have to comply with, but really a point where we see it's super useful input. I spoke in the beginning about that it's not only GSC council staff working on the work of the council, but that some of it is also outsourced. And so one of the aspects which is outsourced to an external contractor is, for example, the catering. So here you see, for example, the heads of state at a formal dinner taking place in the council buildings. Or here, this is a picture from this summer, you know, when the COVID response, was discussed at highest level with, you see Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen there. So, but you see also the drinks, you know, somebody has to provide the drinks and, you know, make sure it's all in place at the right time and so on. And so this catering obviously needs to be done via procurement to ensure that everybody has a fair can participate in this. And in the catering contract, we have ensured that there is a contractual obligation for the caterer to employ over a period of 2 years then 3% persons with disability. For us, this is the first time where we have included such a contractual obligation, and we're very much looking forward to the experience to see whether we can also do this in other areas. I see that for the timing that I have to speed up a little bit. On the recruitment for staff, we collaborate as other EU institutions with EPSO. The EPSO organizes the competitions that people have to pass before they work permanently for the EU institutions. And EPSO has done a lot of work recently to collaborate more with disability organizations to get more people with a disability to apply for competitions. So that is also very important for us. Now, for the traineeships, the council usually had 100 trainees per year, paid trainees and 20 unpaid, usually trainees who do this as part of their studies. The council's traineeship program is an AD career geared program, which means that it's for university graduates. So there was no or is no traineeship program for assistants or other career profiles that do not require a university degree. We saw in the past years that we had virtually no or very, very, very few trainees with a disability. On the picture there is a trainee who has a disability, but this was really very rare. So the numbers were not at all like the society we see in the EU. And so we thought, you know, in order to increase employment also in the long run, because we know that passing a competition, if you have not had the experience, you know, can be more difficult than if you have had this experience of a traineeship. So these were considerations for us to start the positive action program of trainees with a disability. So on top of the 100 regular traineeship programs, to which obviously everybody can apply, so also trainees with a disability, we provide a second option, which is 3 spots guarantee, 3 spots per traineeship period, that is 6 per year, for trainees with a recognized disability. So the first application went out in the beginning of this year, and we see that per traineeship place in this positive action program, we have more than 100 people interested, meaning they start their application, and more than 20 per place who validate their application. We also had really a lot of interest from different services in the house saying, yes, we would like to participate in this program. We would like to have a trainee under this scheme. So very positive reactions. Unfortunately, then, as you know, we're in a year of COVID, so no trainees could start in September. So no trainees, neither in the program which already existed before, nor now, nor in this positive action program. So all the trainees, the start of the trainees were deferred to February next year. And all the trainees who had been offered a traineeship under the positive action program accepted also this deferral. So we are now with the second, in the course of this second phase of selection, the numbers of interested and validated applications have actually gone slightly up, which is very good for us to see because we're in times of Corona. So one would have understood if numbers go down. And then we hope that they will all be able to start then in February next year. This program is a pilot program. It's for 2 years. So after 2 years, it will be evaluated in the experience of the trainees, the experience of the services, and also to see whether the scope would be enlarged of this traineeship program, or if this goes to other areas. For us, this is very much the first step in gaining experience really on positive action. Yes, I'm just checking the time. I think in view of the timing, I stop here, but of course, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm very open to questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the presentation. It was very, very important to see the practical steps that the Council is taking to make sure that people with disabilities get opportunities to work in your institution. I'm sure there will be questions or comments on this, so please, to all participants, put them in the chat section and we'll get to them later on. I would not like to check if MEP Catherine Langen-Ziepen is with us. There should be, but can you hear us and can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Ooh.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Good to have you with us. So we can get to your presentation. And Catherine Langen-Ziepen is a member of the European Parliament who recently finalized the draft report on employment of people with disabilities in the European Union. And that's what she'll be talking about. Of course, we would like to later on in the presentation see more about the recommendations that you made in that report and those specifically for employing people in European Union institutions. So thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Milan. Thanks for the invitation, for the opportunity to present my report. My name is Catherine Langen-Ziepen. I'm from Germany. I'm the only woman with a visible disability in the European Parliament. Yeah, it's great to be with you. About creating employment opportunities in the EU institutions. The employment of persons with disabilities and the equal treatment of persons with disabilities in the labor market is a topic that is very important and personal to me. We all know that a lot of persons with disabilities are still deprived of their right to work. The only woman with a visible disability in the European Parliament, I myself experienced a lot of discrimination in the course of my life. For example, I wanted to become a journalist in front of the camera and presenting the news. That was my dream when was I a little girl, and people told me, you have to be aware of nobody wants to see a woman with a visible disability in front of the TV. So that's impossible. Kill that dream. I became a member of the European Parliament. That's better, but okay. I'm a vice chair of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. And I was very happy when I got the chance to work on a report on the functioning of the Employment Equality Directive relating to persons with disabilities. Normally, these draft reports are only written by the offices of the MEPs, but truly I believe in the motto, nothing about us without us. This is why I included 9 different disability-related NGOs in the drafting of the report. Among them, Inclusion Europe, because you know it better about existing challenges and possible solutions in this field than the persons with disabilities themselves and the NGOs working directly with us. Our cooperative work has been a great experience. We had a lot of eye-opening meetings together and where everybody shared his and her perspective, and the NGOs gave incredible depth and insight to the report. This week, I'm proudly going to present the draft report in the Ample Committee, and it's the first report that includes an easy-to-read part, which has already caused controversy in the Parliament. People were shocked, people were surprised, people were like, we have to delete that. That's can't be part in a report. And I said, yes, it has to be. Our report makes it clear much more has to be done for implementing the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the field of work. We need a horizontal anti-discrimination directive which will give protection to persons with disabilities from discrimination also outside the area of work, and a strong post-2020 disability strategy. In our draft report, we are emphasizing the following points. First point, phasing out of sheltered workshops that are not in line with the UN CRPD. In several member states, persons with disabilities are employed in sheltered workshops in a segregated environment where they often do not have an employee status, neither labor rights, nor a guaranteed minimum wage. This is a clear violation of the UN CRPD. Then, second, we need EU guidelines on reasonable accommodation. One of the reasons employees don't hire persons with disabilities is the lack of knowledge about what reasonable accommodation is and the fear of high expenses and long, complicated processes for realizing it. Clear EU guidelines should make types of reasonable accommodation and processes easier to understand. We also want to strengthen diversity quotas in the EU. Quotas have to be set, maintained and enforced in the member states. In the case of non-compliance, companies should be fined, which fines should then be invested into inclusive education and employment programs. Moreover, the EU member states should support workplace diversity through financial incentives given to companies hiring persons with disabilities and offering targeted positive actions to tackle intersectional disadvantage. The European institutions should be led by example and set diversity quotas. Also, they should develop internal guidelines related to reasonable accommodation. Furthermore, EU institutions should ensure full accessibility during the recruitment process and the workplace, and they should employ persons with disabilities at all levels. This is the only way that we can safeguard inclusion and the mainstreaming of our rights in all policy areas. For a truly inclusive Europe, however, we desperately need awareness-raising campaigns in accessible formats and sign languages, so that society knows about the contributions of existing stigma and prejudice against us. The EU should also push for an universal design. All new buildings and products, including IT equipment and software, in the EU should systematically be conceived within the logic of universal design, so that they can be used by anyone, regardless of their level of ability or disability. We also need to ensure mutual recognition of disability status. To this day, the definition of disability and the related social entitlements and assistance vary from member state to member state, which makes it difficult for persons with disabilities to enjoy their right to free movement in the EU. We need the definition to be harmonized in order to ensure the enjoyment of their rights. And last but not least, data. Currently, there's a considerable lack of data regarding persons with disabilities, which makes it difficult to assess the situation in the member states. The EU has to invest in the collection of comparable disability-related data, including on employment, disaggregated by gender, age, types of disability, race, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, and so on, including relating to those persons with disabilities who have so far been left out of the statistics. These are only the main points we mention in our report, but I really invite you to read the complete version on our EP website and support our demands and bring it to your society, your to the communities, and discuss on that and send me feedback, of course. We will now go into the negotiation with other political groups, and I hope we will come out with a strong report that pushes the Council, the Commission, and the Member States for action we needed. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for not just delivering the presentation, but addressing this very important subject and for the collaboration that we had throughout preparing the report. And it's good that we basically see here the connection between what you were talking about and what the report describes as the need for the European Union institutions to lead by example, to employ people, to lead by example, as you said. And that was important. That's why we wanted, and that we had in the previous presentation, the example of the Council doing that. And obviously, I think there will be many lessons that we can learn from Rebecca's presentation and from the experience of others to see that more people can be employed in the European Parliament and more people can be employed in the European Commission itself. And of course, extending this to people with intellectual disabilities. And on that note, I'm just going back to what you said about the easy to read elements of the report. Very much, of course, appreciated it's part of the report. And on the note that there were some people who objected to that part of the report, we don't need to discuss this here, or just give us the name later on and we'll talk to them. Joking aside, thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll move on to our next speaker, Stefan Trömel, who is a senior disability specialist at the International Labour Organization, and who will talk to us about how the United Nations institutions are making themselves more open and more accessible for people with disabilities to work in. And I think that's a very important exercise for us and for the European Union institutions to look at and to learn from. So thank you, Stefan, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you for the invitation to take part at your webinar. I will, as you mentioned, I will speak about something that I think is a real game changer in terms of making the United Nations a more inclusive organization, both in its external work and its policy work, but also, for instance, to become hopefully an employer of choice for persons with disabilities. Well, first let me explain why we needed a strategy. I'm the disability focal point in the International Labour Organization, and there are similar focal points in many other UN entities. There are a lot of different UN entities. It's really something. There's like 60 to 80 different entities. Some are structures within the Secretariat, but so it's a very complex organization, and I still don't yet know exactly all the entities and all the acronyms that we have. No? But in my discussion with those colleagues who are disability focal points in other entities like UNICEF, like WHO, World Health Organization, like the UNICEF, like UNDP, we all had the feeling that, yes, when we were asked by disability organizations or by member states what we were doing about disability, we could all sort of give some examples. Yes, we're doing this. Yes, there's this office in Philippines or in Indonesia that is doing something on this. But we could definitely not show that there was a systematic approach to disability inclusion. And there were even some entities, some pretty large entities, I won't give any names, within the UN that had no attention at all to persons with disabilities. No? And at the same time, we have the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We have this strong message of leave no one behind. And at the same time, using the words also of this previous speaker, we were definitely, and we're still not, leading by example. No? And the good thing is that that recognition reached the top level of the UN, both the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General. They realized, they were convinced about that, and they decided that we had to put an end to that situation. So it led to a top level decision, as you always know, in many areas, but also on disability inclusion. Top level commitment makes a huge difference. So there was a top level decision made by within the UN context to promote what at that moment was called a system-wide action plan and policy. And the beginning of the process was to undertake an assessment of where the UN was standing. Many of us already knew the status quo, but as you know, very often you still have to provide evidence on the shortcomings before you sort of can address these shortcomings. No? So a questionnaire was developed, and the process was, in fact, was led by the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, Catalina de Vandas, who sent out a questionnaire to almost all UN entities as well as country teams. In the UN, you have both entities like the International Labour Organization, and many others, but we also have at country level what we call UN country teams. No? And UN country teams include, bring together all the UN entities that have a presence in a specific country. They are coordinated by what we call a resident coordinator. So there was two questionnaires were sent out. One is, let's say, to the headquarters of entities like the ILO or UNICEF, and the separate questionnaire to these resident coordinators who sit in the country. No? And of course, the findings of the assessment were as anticipated. Yes, there are pockets of good practice here and there, but definitely no systematic approach to disability inclusion in any of the areas. That basically gave us the green light. We had established a small working group at interagency level. And that working group was mandated by the Secretary General of the UN to come up in a rather short time. We had basically like 3 months to come up with what finally was called the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. And it's a strategy that very much learns from a similar strategy that the UN has been using already for more than 10 years in the area of gender. And from the beginning, we thought that what is technically called in the UN the gender swap, the gender system-wide action plan, was a good model also for disability inclusion, because it's the same logic of mainstreaming disability inclusion throughout the organization. So what are the components of this UNDIS, United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy? On one hand, we have a policy. The policy sets the vision of the organization. It makes a commitment at top level that we want to become a more inclusive organization. It says all the right things. probably in a few years' time, nobody will remember the policy, because it's really the other two elements of the strategy which are, for me, the elements that will be this game changer that I mentioned. On one hand, and both are accountability frameworks. One is an accountability framework for UN entities, and that's the one I will be developing a bit more. And the second one is pretty similar, but it's for these UN country teams that I explained before. So the second framework will assess how much UN entities operating in a specific country are working together on disability inclusion. But of course, that is very important. Think now, for instance, in the context of COVID-19 and in the responses of the UN system also to COVID-19, how important it is to have this strategy in place. And even so, we are not very satisfied with how the UN is reacting to COVID-19. But that's another story. Now, what do we have in this accountability framework? I mean, the whole logic of the framework was, if we really want to make a change, it's no longer good enough that we all do pockets of excellence here and there, have pockets of good practice. That's just not good enough. We need to come up with a system through which we are obliged to report on a regular basis to an entity on how we are implementing specific objectives in a number of different key areas, and areas that brought together really lead to a comprehensive organizational-wide response to disability inclusion. It is not only about programming. It's not only about, no, it really tries to cover all the different areas. I mentioned them very quickly in a minute. So we have now a framework under which we have to report every year. We have to assess ourselves on how we are meeting 15 different indicators, ranging from leadership. We start with leadership. We have to prove how much the heads of our entities are committed to disability inclusion. It's about having whether disability inclusion is reflected in our umbrella, the most important strategic document as organizations. It's also about, do we have an ILO, do we have a disability-specific strategy and or policy? It's of course about employment, and I'll come back to that because I know it's particularly relevant for today's webinar. We have a separate indicator on reasonable accommodation, important for employment, important also for instance, participation in conferences. We have, of course, an indicator on accessibility. We have indicators on capacity development of staff that will measure how much our staff in the UN is familiar with disability inclusion issues. And to be honest, right now, the majority of our staff are not sufficiently aware of disability issues. So we have an indicator that will measure progress in that very important area. We look at about disability inclusion in projects. Like many other entities, much of the work we do as UN entities is funded from donors. And now we are, through this framework, we are measuring how much, on one hand, of course, how many disability-specific projects we have, and that's important. But it's also fair to say that we have very few. But even more importantly, at least from my point of view, is how much are projects, funding that is given to the World Health Organization, to UNICEF, or to ILO, how much of these mainstream funds, say mainstream projects, how many of these are including persons with disability? So now we will have to have a system in place that will provide that information, which is also related to the disability marker that the OECD has established in the context of their Development Assistance Committee. So it's really a way of measuring how much disability inclusion is taken into account into mainstream funding. We have an indicator on communication. We have an indicator on procurement. And I was very interested by the presentation from Rebecca on how the Council of Europe is using procurement processes, for instance, with arranging for a cafeteria or other services to create indirect employment through that. Now we have a specific indicator, and we also already have a guidance document that has been produced in a record amount of time to see how much our procurement processes promote accessibility of products and services, and can also be used for promoting employment of persons with disabilities. And believe me, 5 years ago, when I first spoke with our procurement department in the ILO about disability inclusion in the procurement context, they could not understand what I was talking about. And now we have a guidance document at which our procurement department in the ILO was actively involved, was really taking ownership of the process to say, no, we now need to see how to make tenders for products and services, how we can promote accessibility of these products and services through the very powerful tool of procurement. So we now need to do, as ILO and as the first report that we submitted end of May this year, 57 different UN entities submitted a report, and there are another 20 or so that have not yet done so. We had our first report end of May. We will now need to report every year on progress that we are making in each of these areas. For each of these areas, 5 levels have been defined. You can be at, it can be non-applicable to you. That wouldn't happen in our case. You can be missing it. You have, basically means you have not done anything up to now on that area. You can be approaching the requirements. It means you are doing something, but still not good enough. You can meet the requirements, so you're doing a pretty good job, and you can also be doing an amazing job. Now, there's only one indicator on which the ILO could say that we were doing a very good job, and that's basically collaboration with other UN entities. It's probably the easiest indicator. On all of the other indicators, we were either approaching or missing. Yeah? And that is very similar to the rest of the organization. We have just seen the first report that will be submitted to the General Assembly with aggregated results from all the UN entities that have reported under this. And in general, we are all doing pretty bad in most of the areas, with a few exceptions. No? But I think that's okay, because if we would all be doing an amazing job, then we would not have needed this strategy. Now, this strategy is a recognition of a situation that is far from perfect. And what I'm very happy about is that we were all humbly enough to acknowledge that we are not doing our best. And the other very important thing is, as I said, I'm the head of the disability team in the ILO. There are only 2 or 3 indicators on which which are really under my responsibility. Most of the indicators are responsibility of other departments. It's the human resource department that will need to deliver on employment. It is our facilities department that will need to deliver on the accessibility of our premises. We have a department that is in charge of our organizing our meetings. They will need to deliver on accessibility of our meetings. It's the cabinet of our director general who will need to deliver on leadership. It's our communication department that will need to develop, and procurement department, etc., etc. So it's really a process where what we have done within each our entity, we have informed our colleagues, and we have involved them in the process, of course, so that they are aware that this is their responsibility. We will support them when needed, but at the end of the day, they are the ones that have to deliver on all of these issues. No? So it's really that's why I'm thinking it's a game changer, because it is really making sure that disability inclusion is made an organizational-wide issue, and responsibilities are clearly allocated within relevant colleagues. The other exciting thing, and I'll finish in a couple of minutes, is the framework. There are a number of areas in which the aggregated results from all entities show that most of us are doing a pretty bad job in a number of areas. Procurement is one of them. Communication, we're not doing a good job. Persons with disabilities are largely not visible in our mainstream external communication, whether social media, videos, etc. Terminology is sometimes not fully consistent. So scope for improvement. We're also not so good on consulting with organizations of persons with disabilities. That's also very important. We have a specific indicator about that. And what is happening right now, as we all have, as many of our entities have a problem in these areas, we are currently collaborating together to come up with guidelines on how to address each of these areas. I mentioned the guideline on procurement. So it's really a nice way of promoting issues, also through that ensuring an organization-wide consistent approach to these issues. There was a bit of a risk that we would, for instance, imagine that we have communication guidelines and we would all have our separate guideline, then we might end up with using different terminology in different entities. Now, in the area of employment, there are challenges within the UN. One of the challenges which we have not yet, we're still discussing internally, is how do we measure, how do we assess progress in the actual employment of persons with disabilities? Because in the UN context, we are not supposed to have in our data banks information about the disability of our staff. So we need to find ways through which to assess that information, which is compatible with our privacy and confidentiality rules. And it's not only about numbers, it's also the quality of the employment. And what, for instance, one of the things that we want to do is in our internal staff satisfaction surveys, which we do regularly, to include a question that would allow disaggregation and comparison between staff with and without disabilities, and then to see how much, if there's difference in the level of satisfaction. For instance, on the issue of career development, perhaps on the issue of our mobility policy. It's also important to say that in our employment commitment, it's also about staff that has dependents with disabilities. Also in our context, very often international, especially for international staff, if they have dependents with disabilities, there are certain situations which are not easily accommodated with. So that is a bit in a nutshell the presentation of this UN strategy. I can just finalize by saying how much it is already giving me personally as disability champion here in the ILO leverage to get my colleagues much more committed to disability inclusion, colleagues from all relevant departments, policy departments, managerial departments. And the exciting thing also is that there's a huge level of positive attitude towards it. No, it's not like we were concerned at the beginning a bit that there could be a bit of a fatigue. No, now we have to already deal with gender mainstreaming. Now we have to push more for that. That has not at all been the reaction from I would say, the vast majority of colleagues. No? Even some would say, this is not coming very late, to which we would say, yes, well, better late than never. But we have not really been faced with negative reaction with that. Of course, the impact of COVID-19 has had an impact. I mean, we have not made the progress we would have liked to make in this year in terms of improving performance in the different areas. That has been a bit of put on hold. But overall, we're really extremely excited about the leverage that this strategy is giving us. For instance, we are having our governing body meeting, or basically our highest board meeting. It's next month, and we are having a discussion on disability inclusion in that meeting. And the result of that meeting hopefully will be the adoption both of a disability inclusion policy and multi-annual strategy on disability inclusion in the ILO, something that directly relates to one of the indicators of the framework, and probably something that we would not have been able to push through in the absence of this external leverage that we have now, thanks to the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. Milan, Barbara, I think I'll leave it there, and I'll stay on the call and happy to answer any questions in the final Q&A part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think it was also very informative and inspiring to learn about the strategy, especially at this time when the European Union itself is, the European Commission is drafting a new European Union disability strategy. I think especially the specificity of the UN strategies, the indicators and the monitoring mechanisms are something that we can take a great lot of inspiration from. We had a number of questions about numbers about how many people work in the Council, Parliament, potentially UN institutions, and how many of those are people with disabilities. So I would like to ask you, Catherine, Rebecca, Stefan, if you can answer that question, if you have those numbers. Rebecca already mentioned some, so maybe you can just also remind us, and if you have any sort of specific numbers about the employment of people with disabilities, especially in EU institutions. So maybe start with Rebecca, and then we'll move to Catherine.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for the question in the chat, which is a very relevant question. So I said council staff is approximately 3,000, and then the other is contractuals, and for that we don't have the numbers, and we do not have data on how many staff with disability we have. And of course, the situation is not good, you know, and I can assure you that my team and I are working to change that. But when Stefan was mentioning also the privacy concerns and the framework, that sounded very familiar to some of the discussions I've had in the past. And also when Stefan then mentioned, you know, things like dedicated surveys, not only in voluntary self-identification, but also on the issues behind. These are things that we are looking into to improve the situation. Now, even without having the data, I can assure you that I'm pretty sure the numbers are too low. You know, we really want to improve this. I mean, we have some patchy data. We know how many requests for reasonable accommodation we have. We have an idea how about how many staff are in the network of colleagues with a disability. Of course, we also know that not everybody who has a disability does a request for reasonable accommodation or needs reasonable accommodation. We also know that not everybody will join such a network. You know, it depends on the persons, but if I look at those numbers, I'm very sure that we have to do much, much better.
Thank you, Rebecca. Catherine?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I agree with you. That's why I was asking for data and we need numbers. That was one of my main demands in my report. Even as an MEP, should I know, do I have to know, would I like to know how many people with disabilities working or are MEPs? So I realized that I'm the only one with a visible disability, a woman, was by, okay, checking in the parliament, but that's not evidence-based. So the lack of data is huge. And my feeling is the same like Rebecca. We feel that is a huge lack of people with disabilities, knowledge and competences, and we need more. And it should be something on communication, that we have jobs, we offer jobs, please come and apply for. So why people don't apply for jobs in the European institutions is a lack of communication, is a lack of I don't have the certificate. What is it? So, and that should be the job as MEP and of course in the institution to say, yeah, it's the same like with women. We have no women. We don't find women. They are not willing to apply for. We ask for, but unfortunately, they had no time and they are not willing. Of course, women are there, but what are we doing wrong that we can't hire enough women to fulfill the quota, for example? So not finding can't be an argument. It's a question of communication and rules. Going to them and not that they knock on our door. Yeah, that's from my side.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe just to connect also with what Stefan was saying, I think there's the issue of visibility essentially, and communicating, as you are now saying, at the EU institutions are a place for people with disabilities, and that should be represented, as you said, during job advertisements, but it applies more generally, like the visibility of people with disabilities should be applied throughout publications, materials, so to showcase that is something that is relevant, that they have a place there, they belong there. And maybe just a small note also on one of the reasons why this might not be happening. We shouldn't forget that, of course, EU institutions or any other employers don't exist in a vacuum, and they are part of the broader environment. So traffic accessibility, transportation, just the pure street accessibility. I think anybody who's ever been to Brussels knows that this is one of the big issues, not an excuse, but a part of the situation that facilitates or doesn't help getting being more accessible and getting more people to work in the European institutions as well. So the broader accessibility of cities and the environment in general is also an important element. And with that, let us move to Sylvia from Plena Inclusion, who will talk about what I consider a very successful advocacy activity and program in Spain of ensuring that public service jobs are accessible for people with intellectual disabilities in particular. Sylvia.
Okay, thank you very much, Milan, and Barbara as well for inviting me into this session. I'm very happy to share with you our experience from Plena Inclusion working with the public administrations in Spain. So I'm going to share a presentation. I hope it works. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes,
Right.
you can just put it on. Yeah, it's perfect.
So, okay, the project that I'm going to share with you is a project that we have been working on since 2011, and we have been promoting since then the employment of people with intellectual disabilities in the public sector. Well, this is obviously a project that is within the Sustainable Development Goals and contribute to the objective number 8 to develop decent working conditions and economical growth. And is a project that is within the employment projects of Plena Inclusion. In our employment projects, we try to innovate. We have several projects, several innovation projects related to the employment of people with intellectual disabilities. We also do lobby, so we speak with the government to try to improve the working conditions of people with intellectual disabilities. We also develop different support employment services. And we have this public service this project to promote the employment of people with intellectual disabilities in public services. I wanted to share some basic data about the situation of people with intellectual disabilities in Spain, talking about the labor market. And you can see there how the people with intellectual disabilities have quite poor outcomes when you look at employment. So only 20.2% people with intellectual disabilities are employed. This is data from 2018, and the report is the last year's report. Well, if you compare this data with the general population had an employment rate of 63.4%, and people with disability in general is 25.8%. So you can see how people with intellectual disabilities has poorer outcomes. If we look at the wages, for example, as another indicator, you also can see how people with intellectual disabilities tend to have lower wages than people with disability or people without disability. So, well, I think that the data speaks for itself. So I'm going to, so it is very important to develop different projects to promote the employment of people with intellectual disabilities in Spain, and I think that all over the world. Last week, Inclusion Europe held a seminar, one of these employment seminars, and one of the documents that were presented in the seminar was these reasonable accommodation guidelines, where you could find some promising practices. And I was very happy to see one of the promising practices was the practice held by the government of Biscay in Spain. It's a region in Spain. This practice explains how the regional government started to hire people with disabilities in Spain. I'm very happy because this practice in the province of Spain is one of the results of the project that we developed in Spain. So what I can say is that we started at national level to work with the public administrations to promote the employment of people with intellectual disabilities, as I said before, in 2011. And now we are starting to see how in the regional governments, they are also starting to hire people with intellectual disabilities. So I was really pleased to see this experience in these guidelines. I have to say that in Spain we have a quota system for the hiring of people with disabilities. So in the public sector, there is a quota of 2% of all the employment, all the jobs must go for people with intellectual disability, 2%. So in the project we had different donors that supported the project, and well, you can see some of them in this slide. And I wanted to share well the project itself with you. In 2011, we received a call from the Ministry of the Treasury, and because they were in charge, they are the ones in charge of developing all the employment calls for the public sector. So we had this call because they wanted to. It was the second time that they were going to develop a call specific for people with intellectual disabilities. On the first call that they prepared for people with intellectual disabilities, they didn't make any reasonable adjustments. They made the call as they did for other positions, and you know what? They found that nobody wanted to join this exam, this call. So in the second time, they decided that they were going to ask organizations working with people with disabilities to support them in order to prepare this call. So in 2011, we started to have meetings with the ministry. I think this is an example of co-production because we started to work together from the beginning. So they asked us about how to prepare the call, how to write it down, which jobs were more suitable for the position, and we were giving them advice about all the preparation. We also support them in things like education, because there was a requirement about having some certifications, and in Spain we felt that many people could be left behind if they were asking for those levels of certification, because there were some people, well, there were many people working in that had been studying in special education schools, and they couldn't reach those certifications. So we also give them advice about how to include the level of the studies that the people should have to access this call. And so, I mean, we started from the beginning. When the call was in preparation, we also went to several sites of the public administration, to the buildings, and we did a job analysis in order to better understand the competences and the work that the people with intellectual disabilities had to deliver. So we were better prepared to later on develop some training materials because for the call they had to pass in order to get the job they had to pass an exam. So we developed some training materials for the people with intellectual disabilities so they could prepare for this exam. So we did these easy to read materials for the training. We also did an application in easy to read because the application for the call was quite complicated and we made an easy to read application. We also had an agreement about the format of the exam. We thought that a test was better than a practical exam. And we were quite right with that because we were, there were 56 jobs for this call available. And we were not sure about how many people could apply for the job. And and when the call went out, there were around 3,000 people applying for the jobs, for the 56 jobs. So as you can imagine, doing a practical exam might have been quite difficult. So I think that the test worked well. We also did easy to read materials about the whole process, about the call. We also developed examples of exams, exercises, as I said before, the application. And in Plena Inclusión, we had two roles. We supported the public administration, but we also provide support to the organizations working directly with people with intellectual disabilities, so they could prepare them to do a good exam. And we also work with people with intellectual disabilities and families through the whole process. So we developed an online platform at the beginning, and in the online platform, any person interested could download training materials, examples of exams, also exercises. So they have all this information available. We also have a chat where anyone could share their doubts and questions. And we had many questions because this was the first time that public jobs were available for people with intellectual disabilities. So there were a lot of questions. So we provide, we also provide, disseminate all the information about the whole process because there are like different deadlines, and we inform about all the deadlines and all that. As I said, we started in 2000 and we have been collaborating with the ministry since then. In here you have some data. The exams, there have been five calls up to 2018, and in here you can see that on the first call there were 54 jobs. In 2014 there was another call and there were 10 jobs. 2015 15 jobs, and it has been increasing. And also you can see how many people were applying for each of the jobs. There were 75% of the people applying for, doing the exam passed the exam, and the average punctuation of the exam was 7 out of 10. So that was, it was very good because it shows that people with intellectual disabilities were ready to do the job, but it was quite difficult for the ministry to do to select the people the candidates. So on the first time they had to do the exam again in order to choose these 54 people for the job. Since 2011, we have make some changes in the process and to as I said before, we started at national level, but we also thought that it was very important that the regional and local governments also had this quota system and had this 2% of people with intellectual disabilities working on their premises. So in 2018, we did a seminar about public employment for people with intellectual disabilities, and we were very happy because we were able to reach people from the regional public administrations, and we could see how this was like a no returning point. In 2018, we draw a map of the regions that were already having specific calls for people with intellectual disabilities, and you could see some points in some of the regions. And now in 2020, if you see this map again, you can see how all the regions of Spain are doing these processes. So we are very, very pleased with that. We also developed some guidelines about how to do the identifying good practices in promoting the public employment of people with intellectual disabilities. I'm not going to explain all that because it will be too long, but you can see later on the presentation. One of the challenges that we have is that even people with intellectual we have people with intellectual disabilities that started to work in the public administration in 2013, and some of them now want to promote. They want to have a better job, but the process to access this promotion is not, they don't have any reasonable adjustments. So this is one of the challenges that we have now, and this is like a unknown trip. We don't know where it's going to take us, and we also say that if anyone wants to join us to deliver this new, to design how this new process has to be, that people is more than welcome to join us. We also develop a protocol for public administration, so any public administration interested in developing specific calls for people with intellectual disabilities has this manual, and they can see the different steps that they have to follow in order to do a call for people with intellectual disabilities that is accessible for them. These are some of the challenges that we have in this project. One of them is that people with more complex needs also have the right to employment, and they are not accessing the public sector employment because it is required that there are more reasonable adjustments in the hiring process. Another of the challenges that we have is that right now the jobs that are offered for people with intellectual disabilities are mainly like janitor positions or cleaning or something like that, and we want to work with the ministry to develop different job profiles, because we know that people with intellectual disabilities also have other kinds of certificates, and they could be doing a good job there as well. Another of the issues that we have is that for people with intellectual disabilities, we have been working for a long time with supported employment methodologies, and we know that supported employment is very, very good for ensuring that people with intellectual disabilities do a good job when they are working. But right now there isn't any. There is no an obligation from the public administration to do support employment or to have job coaches in the job environment. And we feel that this is very, very important, not only for the person with intellectual disability that goes to the job, but also for their colleagues, so they can better understand what the person with intellectual disabilities might need, what they can expect. We think that this role is very important and that it should be offered for people with intellectual disabilities. One of the challenges that, as I said, that I think that we are nearly going to fulfill it is that all the regions of Spain should have specific calls for people with intellectual disabilities. We now need that all the local councils also have people with intellectual disabilities and this quota system. And one of the challenges, and I think that this is a very good place to share this challenge, is that the European institutions should also have a quota system similar to the Spanish model to ensure that people with intellectual disabilities or people with disabilities access public employment. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia.
Welcome.
We've now covered in the presentations European perspective, international from United Nations, and also a national perspective with Spanish example. And I think it was very useful to give us a very clear idea of how the support to get people into public jobs can actually work in practice. So thank you very much. We had some questions about the numbers of countries that use similar quota systems. I'm not sure we will be able to answer that question here directly, but I think we can refer you to the draft report that we posted the link. There are certainly some numbers in there. And I would encourage you again to put your questions in the chat, and maybe now, as we've heard all 4 presentations, would like to maybe check with you speakers as well if there are any thoughts and ideas generated by the other presentations and insights from the different kind of perspectives that we've covered in here. And I don't want to point on anybody indirectly and name anyone and put any pressure like that, but I'm really opening this for you as speakers if there is anyone, or maybe a follow-up questions or ideas that you gathered from the presentations that we had. Yes, Stefan, please go on.
Yes, well, 2 comments. First, I would say that I think this the internship idea from the Council of Europe is a very good one. I think it's something that we have been discussing. I mean, we have other tools in the UN system. We have something called, but we have volunteers, of course. We also have junior professionals, which are sometimes seconded by governments for a year, 2 years, and 3 years. And very often, unfortunately, it's very much a developed country. There's only developed countries that can afford it, and only a few of them would also allow a person from a developing country to come. No? And we have met with them in the context also of UNDIS to see whether more efforts could be made to have some of these young professionals that are coming to the UN system, that they are persons with disabilities. No? Because I think Rebecca is fully right. That direct experience of working in the UN or working in an institution, in an international institution, helps a lot in order to then be able to sort of meet past the entry requirements, which are sometimes a bit high. We're also looking in the UN context to we have both international staff and national staff, and very often when we think about this, we think about international staff requirements, which are pretty high. and also, well, bring within them other connotation. No? It's like also the decision to move to another place. I mean, a bit the problem, Ilan, that you referred to in the context of Brussels. No? And I think, but we also have national staff. No? We have national staff where sometimes the entry requirements are not as difficult, and I think we're not doing enough in terms of getting also national staff with disabilities, and I think there we have more opportunities. I don't know whether that also makes some sense in terms of the European Commission. I know, for instance, the European Commission also has the European Commission offices and all that. The other point I wanted to address is, Milan, the issue of quotas. I mean, we have a publication in the ILO that looks into the issue of countries that have quota legislation. I think from memory now there are definitely more than 80, I think almost 100 countries that have quota legislation. But in most of the countries, the quota legislation is not adequately implemented. No? In most of the countries, it applies both to the private and the public sector. But as I said, in general, it's not very well enforced. I think what is interesting in the Spanish example is also the fact that they have a sub-quota for persons with intellectual disabilities. No? And that is very exceptional. No? We don't have that in other contexts. And I think definitely that has helped a lot, I guess, with the work that Plena Inclusión is doing, because otherwise the problem with quota legislation, whether in the public or the private sector, well, let's say it's easier for other groups. It's easier for other groups of persons with disabilities to find a job through a quota than for persons with intellectual disability. You know? And from that point of view, a sub-quota reserving a specific percentage for persons with intellectual disability is I think is useful in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And Rebecca.
Thank you, Milan. Really, really interesting. I said at the beginning of my talk, when I saw the list of speakers, I thought, why you ask me? And I'm mostly here to listen and to learn. And this is exactly what I have been doing during this. So to Catherine, I'm really very impressed by your report. And I have to say, the criticism that you mentioned on the easy to read, when I saw that, I thought all reports would need that. You know, I think it would bring the EU closer to all of EU citizens. So to Stefan, I was really struck by the many parallels of the challenges that we face in the UN context or in the context of the EU institutions. And I think it would be quite useful to exchange also in the future on these topics. If you allow me a question, I was quite intrigued when you said you measure the awareness about disability issues among staff. And this would be something where I would be really interested in to hear more about. The other point where, but maybe this could be a follow-up after this meeting, is on the guidelines on procurement on products. I would also be really interested to learn about that. And yes, Sylvia, from you, I think we can learn a lot. And I think you will. I think you have already met a colleague from my team, or at least you were in the same conference or webinar last week. And I think there will be further contacts. I have to be honest and realistic. I think quota in the EU institutions or in the council, it's, you know, this will still be a lot of work that has to be done before we are there. But the fact that there is a lot of work to be done does not mean we should not start doing that work. You know?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And Catherine?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, the criticism was on my report and the easy to read version. They commented on that, we are not obliged to put the easy to read version in all reports and papers we are getting. They are really worried about that, that we ask as Greens in our report to automatically add an easy to read version in all papers we we get in the European institution. That was like, oh my God, what she's asking. But was funny, and I was waiting for a reaction like that. So when comes the push from the others to say, yeah, people with disabilities is important, it's nice to have, but if it comes to money, if it comes to quotas, if it comes to the real hard facts, then they say, oh, no, 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 no. I was thinking or asking myself, to us during the process was super important to ask people with disabilities, nothing without us about us, to receive input from them. How can we proceed to get the opinion, first of all, we need the people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities in the institutions, paid jobs, but in processes, in our committees, in how can we motivate people, how can we push people or open our institutions for people with intellectual disabilities in political processes, to educate, and not like, okay, now you have the possibility to participate, or you're not able, I'm sorry, so you can, as we were expecting it, you can't do the job. So like empowerment. How can we empower people with intellectual disabilities to jump into the political bubble, to participate, and not only, or not, I'm not clever enough like that. I heard from other people without disabilities being afraid of making politics, but so that is what I ask myself, or you in the team, to the listeners, what could be a good, not start, but a good way.
Thank you very much. Just to maybe follow up on that a little bit, I think it connects back to what you were saying about easy to read and sort of the people being afraid what this would mean for all the topics to be covered. Like, and it would mean that people who don't have 5 degrees from various universities might get an idea what the subject is about. It means making the whole environment much more accessible, and in that way opening it up to many more, not just people with intellectual disabilities or other disabilities, but as you said, like to others who might be intimidated by all the big words and 1,000 pages reports, and sort of presenting those topics in a, let's say, simple, more accessible way can go a long way of dealing with that. Sylvia.
And I want also to follow up in what you are saying, Milan, is that from the side of the people, the organization supporting people with intellectual disabilities, well, Inclusion Europe is doing a great work with the training in leadership for people with intellectual disabilities. So we are doing our part of the job as well. I also wanted to say to Rebecca that I think that, well, the work that you are doing is quite interesting, and I was really especially interested by the network of staff with disabilities and the network of carers. I think that this is a good initiative, and I'm sure that you will be getting good input from there. I think it's really good to know that you are doing this work. And to Catherine, I'm glad that you are involving the organizations of people with disabilities in the report, because, as you say, they are the ones that know, and I am sure that what we have experienced with Easy to Read is that when we do 2 versions of the document, one in Easy to Read and one in not Easy to Read, the version that people download is the version in Easy to Read. So you will see the difference. For sure. I also wanted to say to Esteban that it's very interesting the work that you are doing in the disability strategy, and from Plena Inclusión, we would like to reach the Spanish office of the International Work Organization, because we want to liaise with you in thinking about the future of the employment for people with intellectual disabilities, because I think that you are doing a lot of work on that issue, and for us it's also very, very important. So we will get in touch with you.
And with that, with the words that there will be a lot of work to be done in the future, I think we could be getting this webinar to a close. I think thank you very much to all of you speakers. I think it was giving a lot of inspiration to the work that needs to be done in the future, and we could see from various angles what can be done, how different kind of organizations and institutions are approaching this. So I think I found the seminar very informative and engaging. Thank you very much for your contributions. To all your participants contributing your questions and being dedicating your time to our webinar, thank you very much as well. You will find all the documents available on our website, as well as the recording of this webinar. Keep in touch with Inclusion Europe on social media or newsletters or in any other way. We'll have some more webinars and conferences on employment, and we'll be dedicating all of 2021 to the subject of employment and Inclusion Europe, so there will be plenty more opportunities to develop these conversations and these ideas further. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.